Well, I don't know why God chooses. I don't know. But at least we went to the source that could fix it. At least we went right there to Jesus and said, here's the problem. And not if you can do something about it, because we're mature enough to know that He can do something about it. Whatever's going on in my life, God is big enough to take care of it. If God can create me, then God can take care of me. If God can create me, form me out of nothing, then God can maintain me as I go along, as God sees fit. If you can do anything. Jesus said, if there are no ifs among believers, anything can happen. Anything. I was talking to my prayer partner Carol the other day, and she said, well, we need another miracle around here today. And I said, that's good. I mean, it was just nonchalant conversation. And she said, but that's nothing. I said, you're right, it's nothing. Because we're used to seeing miracles. We grew up with them. Not always is there instantaneous healing, but sometimes there is. Not always do I get over my problem and the seizure of my temper or whatever stop immediately, but sometimes it does. And when it's over, it's over. She said, that's just another day in the neighborhood at the Love household. Her last name is Love. I said, you're right. I said, Carol, can you listen to our conversation? We're just talking nonchalantly about, well, we're going to get a miracle in the Love household today. God's going to come through and we'll see what happens. I said, most people are like, a miracle? Something that they have to stand in awe of. I said, we grow up in the Spirit of God where we know what miracles really are, and miracles become commonplace in our lives. If you can do anything, Jesus says. There are no ifs. Anything can happen. No sooner were the words out of his mouth than the Father cried, well, then I believe. But help my doubts. The old King James Version said, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. You mean you can believe and not believe at the same time? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's an amount thing. Maybe I have this much belief and this much unbelief. But maybe as my belief climbs, my unbelief gets smaller. It forces the unbelief out. Finally, the man got it. Seeing that the crowd was forming fast, Jesus gave the vile spirit its marching orders. Dumb and deaf spirit, I command you, out of him and stay out. Screaming and with much thrashing about, it left. You know, we don't need a crowd to get God's attention. The crowd was about to come over because there was so much stirring. And on Facebook, we can create a stir. We can get a crowd right in a second, can't we? It's amazing. And sometimes that's a good thing because sometimes we do want a crowd. But we don't have to have a crowd if we know who Jesus is. All we need to learn is how to speak the word to make the problem go. Just like Jesus spoke the word to make the problem go. That spirit did not want to leave the boy. In fact, there was one last seizure. Anybody holding on to something that really you may have asked God to take away and help you with, but then as soon as God's ready to take it away, you're like, whoa, that's mine. I thought I wanted you to take that away, but maybe I don't. I like my suffering. I like this problem because I know what to do. I know how to cope. I'm getting through. And I just wonder how often we really mean it when we ask God to take the issue away, when really we just want to hang on to it a little while longer. I want to tell you something. Whatever that is, it may leave us, if we really are ready to let go of it, it may take some kicking and screaming on our part to let it go. But if we really, really want it to go, God can take it away if we allow it. The boy was pale as a corpse, so people started saying, he's dead. You know, we just need to let go and let God. We need to let it die. We need to let it die so that it is a corpse. So it's out with the old and in with the new. That old part of him was dying, and people took notice. I guarantee you when he got up off the ground, he was somebody new. The last time it happened. He was dead. The old him was dead, and the new him was on the way. Good riddance. But Jesus, taking his hand, raised him, and the boy stood up. Like I said, out with the old, in with the new. And when God picks you up, you're up. Arriving back home, his disciples cornered Jesus and asked, why couldn't we throw that demon out? And Jesus says there's no way to get rid of this kind of demon except by prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting. There's no way to have this kind of power, this kind of control, this kind of authority, this kind of I'm going to let go even if it's kicking and screaming of this issue that I've had maybe all of my life, except by prayer and fasting. Now, we all know that prayer is communicating with God and God communicating with us, and I'm going to preach more about that next week. But I want to zero in on that fasting because that's the main part of today's sermon. During this Lenten season, it's known as a time of fasting. Fasting for 40 days. 40 days of fasting. Now, does that mean you can't eat anything for 40 days? No, not necessarily. Maybe you give up one meal for 40 days, or maybe you give up something else in your life. But I want to tell you something that came to me when I was putting this sermon together. And I'm going to tell on you if it's okay. Can I tell on you? Okay. And it may not be you all in you general, but I'm talking about church people in general. I've noticed because of the world that we live in today, where we want instant everything, and we are so, I want to just say overwhelmed with so much stimuli coming at us from every direction. We can now have, I saw an ad for a new TV this week on my TV that said you can now have all of your channels at the same time. So now you can have all these frames within a frame. So you can have like 4 of your favorite shows going at the same time. And I'm like, what? Why? Why do I need to do that? I mean, why am I going to force my brain to try to keep up with 4 different storylines at one time, all happening at the same time? And they're marketing it. And I guarantee you it'll be a bestseller. And I'm thinking about, and Andre, you might be getting older today, but you probably can't remember some of the things that I can. I remember when we only had one car in the whole family. We had the family car, and we all had to share, and we all had to go in that one car. And I remember when there was no such thing as a computer in our world. There was no... Sometimes I look at Matlock or In the Heat of the Night, and I'm like, oh my God, look at that phone. And when they're trying to figure out, when they started using computers on on those crime dramas, it's like, because sometimes they're somewhere and I'm like, well, why don't you just call them? And I'm like, oh, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have internet. They couldn't have a smartphone and have everything coming at them at one time. And even at church, a friend of mine, Carrie Studdard, that I grew up, well, I didn't grow up with, I was in college with. Carrie lives in Atlanta, and he said, I would love to just go to church one more time where they didn't have to pull all the plugs to entertain, to keep people involved, to keep people's attention. I would love it if we could just come and the Spirit was the headliner. And the Spirit just directed the whole service. And I read that and I thought, well, I remember those times. But as a pastor, I can't make that happen because I can't keep a crowd. No offense to you in particular. I'm just saying any pastor. You've got to come up with every gimmick to get people to come. Now, there's a handful, there's a core of people that are going to be at the church no matter what, because the church is their life. This is their social life. This is their spiritual life. This is their life. That's the way I grew up. Anything that happened in church, we were there. That was our whole social life. Everybody we knew was at church. We didn't know anybody outside of church. We didn't hang out with people we went to school with. We didn't hang out with our next door neighbors. We knew who they were, but we didn't hang out with them. Everything we did was church, 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 church. But these days, it's not the same. People are like, why should I get up and go? Especially if I can see it on my computer. Really. And there are some Sunday mornings I would be real tempted to stay in myself. So don't look at me like I'm just walking on your toes. I can't do that, though, because you see, I have this job that has a requirement that I show up. I can't just watch it next week online or on YouTube. I noticed at our Ash Wednesday service, it was a quiet, reflective service. It was one in which I didn't have to do anything in the service except put the ashes on people's heads. I put the programs at the doorways so that you had to stop by it to get in the door. It would almost trip you because it took up half the doorway. So that you would have the piece of paper that gave you your directions of what to do in the service. So nobody could say a word in the sanctuary. It would just be really, 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 really quiet. Really, 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 really reflective. Because it's about giving up, every thought, every issue, everything, and just being quiet before the Lord. And I was almost amused at the people that just slipped right past those things and didn't take one and just came on in and sat down and waited for someone to stimulate them. Come on. Is that all right? And if you're guilty, please don't take offense. This is not I'm not preaching down to you, because I would have probably done the same thing. All right? I'm not trying to talk down to anybody. But it was not the usual thing, right? It was not usually we come to church and somebody stimulates us. The music stimulates us. The preacher stimulates us. The communion, active, involved, getting up, sitting down, kneeling down, genuflecting, raising your hands, whatever.